The golden afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sprawling estate as Rashid's luxury car pulled through the ornate iron gates. He glanced sideways at Yasmin, whose dark eyes sparkled with curiosity as she took in the magnificent property sprawling before them. "This is it, Habibti," Rashid said softly, his voice carrying the weight of promises yet to be fulfilled. "Our future home." Yasmin's breath caught as they drove up the winding path lined with ancient olive trees. The main house stood like a jewel against the backdrop of rolling hills, its traditional architecture seamlessly blended with modern elegance. Gardens burst with jasmine and rose bushes, their perfume drifting through the car windows. "Rashid, it's breathtaking," she whispered, her fingers finding his on the steering wheel. "But how can we afford something like this?" He squeezed her hand, his wedding ring catching the light momentarily before he shifted gears. "Leave the details to me. I've been planning this for months. Soon we won't have to hide anymore. No more stolen moments, no more pretending." They parked near a fountain, where water danced over carved marble dolphins. As they stepped out, Yasmin's flowing dress caught the breeze, and Rashid couldn't help but admire how the setting sun highlighted the copper tones in her hair. She had always been beautiful, but here, in this garden that he imagined would be theirs, she seemed to glow. "Come," he said, taking her hand and leading her toward the terrace. "Let me show you where we'll have our morning coffee." The terrace overlooked a garden maze with paths that curved around fountains and hidden alcoves. Yasmin leaned against the stone balustrade, and Rashid moved behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "Tell me about your wife," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Rashid's jaw tightened slightly. "Amira and we've been strangers for years. She's always busy with her charities and committees. We live like roommates, nothing more. She won't even notice when I'm gone." Yasmin turned in his arms, her eyes searching his face. "And you're certain this is what you want, leaving everything behind? For you? For this?" He gestured toward the garden where evening was beginning to paint everything in shades of amber and gold. "Absolutely. This place will be our sanctuary, away from all the complications of my old life." As if summoned by his words, the sound of a car engine hummed in the distance, growing closer. They both froze, listening as gravel crunched under approaching tires. "Who could that be?" Yasmin asked, stepping closer to Rashid. Before he could answer, a sleek sedan appeared around the curve of the drive, its windows tinted dark against the dying light.
The sedan came to a graceful stop near the fountain, and Rashid felt his blood turn to ice as he recognized the vehicle. The driver's door opened, and Amira stepped out with the fluid elegance that had first captivated him 15 years ago. She wore a simple cream-colored abaya that somehow made her look more regal than any evening gown. "Rashid," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the garden. There was no anger in her tone, no accusation, just a calm certainty that made his stomach drop. Yasmin gripped his arm tighter. "Who is that?" "My wife," he whispered, the words feeling like stones in his throat. Amira approached them unhurriedly, her dark hair catching the last rays of sunlight. When she reached the terrace steps, she paused and smiled, not at Rashid, but at Yasmin, with something that looked almost like sympathy. "I hope you're enjoying the tour," Amira said, her voice melodious and untroubled. "The garden is particularly beautiful at this time of day." Rashid found his voice. "Amira, what are you doing here? How did you know about this place?" she finished gently. "Because I own it, Habibi. I've owned it for 6 months now." The words hit Rashid like a physical blow. Yasmin's hand fell away from his arm as she stepped back, her face pale with shock and dawning understanding. "That's impossible," Rashid stammered. "The property isn't even listed yet. I've been working with the developer." "Through my holding company," Amira said, climbing the terrace steps with measured grace. "Nor Holdings. I had my lawyer set it up specifically for this purchase." She looked around the garden with obvious affection. "I plan to convert it into a wellness retreat for women who need healing, a place where they can rediscover their strength." Yasmin's eyes darted between them, realization crashing over her like a wave. "You knew?" she whispered to Amira. "You knew he would bring me here?" "I suspected he might. Rashid has always been predictable in his grand gestures, though I didn't expect him to promise you something that was already mine." "Amira, let me explain," Rashid began, but Yasmin was already backing away. I won't be part of this," Yasmin said, her voice breaking. She turned and fled toward the car, her footsteps echoing on the stone path. Rashid started after her, but Amira's quiet words stopped him cold. "Let her go, Rashid. She deserves better than being caught in the middle of our marriage." He watched helplessly as Yasmin's car disappeared through the gates, then turned to face his wife. Amira stood silhouetted against the garden, looking like a queen surveying her kingdom, which, he realized with growing horror, was exactly what she was.
3 weeks passed before Rashid could bring himself to return to the estate. When he did, he found construction crews working throughout the property, transforming his imagined love nest into something entirely different. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air where he had once planned romantic evenings. Amira emerged from the main house, wearing work clothes and a hard hat, consulting with an architect over blueprints. She looked up when she saw his car, offering him a nod of acknowledgement before returning to her discussion. The casual dismissal stung more than any argument would have. Over the following days, Rashid found himself driving past the estate regularly, watching his wife's vision take shape. Where he had seen only a backdrop for his affair, Amira had seen potential for something meaningful. The maze was being renovated into meditation gardens. The pool area was becoming a therapeutic space. Every change spoke of careful planning and deep purpose. He tried calling Yasmin several times, but she never answered. When he finally reached her, her voice was distant and cold. "I've been thinking, Rashid," she said without preamble. "What we had, it was exciting because it was forbidden. But it wasn't real, was it? Not like what you have with her." "Had," he corrected quickly. "Past tense." "No," Yasmin said softly. "Present tense. You just didn't realize it until you saw her standing in that garden, owning everything you thought you could give away. She didn't fight for you, Rashid. She didn't need to. She already knew her worth." The line went dead, leaving Rashid alone with the truth he hadn't wanted to face. That evening, he sat in his study surrounded by the detritus of his old life, photos of business dinners, awards, the trappings of success. But his eyes kept drifting to one picture, Amira at their wedding, radiant with joy and trust. When had he stopped seeing that light in her eyes? When had he become someone who took such devotion for granted? The next morning, he drove to the estate again. This time, instead of watching from the road, he parked and walked into the construction zone. Amira looked up from where she was directing the installation of a fountain, not the ornate marble dolphins he remembered, but something simpler and more serene. "The meditation garden will be ready next month. The first group of women arrives in 6 weeks." "Amira," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to talk to you." She finally met his eyes, and he saw something there he hadn't expected. Not anger or hurt, but a quiet strength that made him feel small and ashamed. "Then talk," she said simply. For the first time in years, Rashid found himself at a loss for words. Standing in the garden that his wife had transformed, surrounded by the evidence of her vision and determination, he realized how thoroughly he had underestimated the woman he married. "I've ended things with Yasmin," he said finally. "Completely." Amira nodded once, as if this was merely a practical detail to be noted. "Good. She seems like a decent person. She doesn't deserve to be anyone's secret." The casual response deflated him. He had expected, what? Gratitude? Relief? Instead, Amira turned back to her blueprints as if his presence was of minor importance. "That's it?" he asked. "That's all you have to say?" "What would you like me to say, Rashid?" She looked up at him with eyes that held no malice, only a weary patience. "Would you like me to celebrate that you've chosen to stop betraying our marriage vows? Should I be grateful that you've decided to honor commitments you made freely 15 years ago?" The words cut deep because they were delivered without cruelty, just simple, devastating logic. Over the following weeks, Rashid threw himself into understanding his wife's world in a way he never had before. He researched the organizations she supported, read about the causes she championed. He discovered that while he had been focused on building his business empire, Amira had been building something far more meaningful, a network of support for women facing difficult transitions in their lives. He began showing up at the estate daily, not to interfere, but to help. At first, Amira watched him warily as he carried supplies, consulted with contractors, and even contributed his own business expertise to streamline the renovation process. "Why?" she asked him one evening as they stood together watching the sunset paint the garden in shades of rose and gold. "Because I want to understand what I almost destroyed. Because I want to be worthy of the woman who could forgive her husband's betrayal and still create something beautiful." Amira was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't forgive you to be kind, Rashid. I forgave you to be free. Free from anger, from resentment, from the burden of carrying your mistakes." "And what about us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is there still an us?" She turned to look at him, and for the first time in months, he saw a flicker of the woman who had once looked at him with complete trust and love. "That," she said softly, "depends entirely on who you choose to be from now on."
6 months later, the Newer Women's Retreat welcomed its first group of guests. Rashid stood at the edge of the property, watching his wife welcome women who had come seeking healing from various heartbreaks: divorce, loss, betrayal, disappointment. Some arrived with hollow eyes and hesitant steps. Others came with fierce determination to reclaim their lives. Amira moved among them like a gentle force of nature, offering just the right words, the perfect gesture of comfort or encouragement. Watching her, Rashid marveled at how he had ever thought her ordinary or taken her strength for granted. "She's remarkable," said Dr. Layla Mansour, the retreat's counselor, joining him in his observation. "This place has already changed so many lives." "Including mine," Rashid admitted. "I was lost for a long time. I just didn't realize it until I saw what I was about to lose." That evening, after the guests had retired to their rooms, Rashid found Amira sitting in the garden maze they had redesigned together. She was sketching plans for the next phase of renovations, a workshop space where women could learn new skills and discover hidden talents. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the bench beside her. She smiled and moved over, making room for him. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the fountain's gentle music and the evening chorus of crickets. "Do you remember," Amira said softly, "when we first talked about buying a house together, before we were married?" Rashid smiled at the memory. "You said you wanted a garden where you could grow things, where you could watch beautiful things take root and flourish. You told me then that you couldn't see the point of gardens," she reminded him with gentle teasing. "You said they required too much patience." "I was wrong about a lot of things," he said, taking her hand. Her wedding ring caught the moonlight. She had never stopped wearing it, even during their darkest days. "But I'd like to think I'm learning patience now." Amira leaned against his shoulder, a gesture so natural and trusting that it made his heart ache with gratitude. "This place taught me something important. Sometimes the most broken ground grows the most beautiful gardens." "Are you speaking metaphorically? About the retreat? About us? About second chances?" She tilted her face up to look at him, and he saw love there, different than before, deeper and more intentional. All of the above. As they walked back to the house together, hand in hand, Rashid realized that the garden had indeed become exactly what Amira had envisioned, a place where broken things could be nurtured back to wholeness. The estate was no longer a symbol of his deception, but a testament to his wife's wisdom and their marriage's capacity for renewal. The retreat would help countless women rediscover their strength. But perhaps more importantly, it had helped him rediscover the man worthy of loving and being loved by, the extraordinary woman who had never stopped believing in the possibility of growing something beautiful from damaged ground.